Welcome back to NVC Dudes. I'm your co-host, Jamie Prieto.
I'm Brian Broom, and we've got more dudes. We've got more dudes included.
And we invited Cory Tyler to join us today. Hey, Cory.
Hey, now, how you guys doing?
Good.
Very good, very good.
So, gosh, I thought about how to introduce Cory, and I realized that, you know, in the static world, the regular world, we like introduce people and label them with static labels, like, you know, actor and NVC trainer candidate and all these, you know, wonderful labels. But gosh, I'd love it, Cory, if you just introduced yourself and, you know, what's your passion? I'd love to hear some of that in there.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to be on the show with you gentlemen. I'm looking forward to the dialogue and getting to know you guys. In a nutshell, I'm an Angelino, born in Hollywood, California back in the 70s. Come from an entertainment family, so my dad is a ventriloquist. And so I started doing TV commercials at a young age and grew up in the entertainment industry, did some TV shows in my teens and 20s, and then transitioned out of that when I started learning about meditation. And meditation led me to start working at a spiritual center out here that's very well known called Agape. And whoever's seen The Secret probably knows Michael Beckwith. He's the founder of that spiritual center. And so then I became subsequently a counselor there and worked on staff at Agape for 9 years and really enjoyed it. And then one day some guy shows up with some puppets, a giraffe puppet and a jackal puppet. And I said, what the heck is this? And little did I know that was sort of the next step of my evolution. And when I got a gist of what nonviolent communication was, I wanted to know more. And that was a number of years ago. And now here I am, having transitioned out of entertainment. I'm now a counselor, and I'm the founder of a company called Confidant International, which basically connects NVC trainers with clients. And I'm a father of 2 sons that are 10 and 7. And I'm very concerned with what's going on with the state of the world and how what I call nonviolent consciousness and communication and action can contribute to a better world.
Right on, Cory. I'm so glad you're here. And first time I ran into Cory, actually it was a Taste of Connection event that I was hosting. I guess our common friend, Ep09, invited you, mentioned it to you. So Eric is sort of like our NVC networking guru, you know, another static label there, just to call it out. But
Eric's
yeah, it's fun. It's fun that we know a couple guys. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying, Eric has his hand in everything, and I'm so grateful. I actually met him at an IIT, an International Intensive Training for NVC, a little over a year ago, and absolutely love Eric. So shout out to Eric.
Yeah. So yeah, Cory, we've been, you know, I'm totally concerned about what's going on in the world right now. Brian and I have been talking about social justice issues, you know, racism, implicit bias. We touched on, you know, can police be trained in NVC, and, you know, what's the consciousness required for that to actually work. But yeah, definitely glad to have you join the call and join the conversation, really. And would love to hear, you know, what's up for you. How would you like to either continue on any of those threads or just come up with, you know, what's important to you right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I mentioned, I'm an NVC dude. I'm also an NVC dad because I use NVC. Hey, JP, you know.
Yeah.
It goes hand in hand. And what I mean by that is communicating in such a way in which it promotes connection versus disconnection. And I really enjoy being a father because for me, I have a way of communicating with both of my sons that has been very important during this time. So I was just in New York. Their mom lives in New York, so we're out there visiting. And it was right around the time in which businesses started opening post-COVID. Not that we're at post-COVID yet, but some of the businesses are starting to open. And so we went into Times Square on a particular day. And it was really eerie, guys, because it was like desolate, like hardly any people. Sprinkled in were a few police officers on every other corner, or this, that, and the other. Stores were boarded up. This was right around the time in which George Floyd was murdered, and subsequently there were protests and riots. And then in these big billboards that usually have Coca-Cola or whatever they're selling, they had the words Black Lives Matter.
Wow.
And so here I am taking this snapshot of my two sons, and behind us, multiple Black Lives Matter billboards. And it was an interesting moment to realize I had to have the talk, where a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old now have to be introduced to a world that's not a pretty world to talk about, but it's a real world nonetheless. So as a father, during that trip, we had an opportunity to really talk about some stuff, and talk about violence, and talk about inequality, and talk about, these things that I would have rather my sons learned later in life, but it's like they're going to learn it, and they're going to learn it with or without me. So during this time of civil unrest, one of the things that I've been very mindful of is this is a mainstream human event. It's something that has affected me as a Black person, and I imagine the Black community as a whole. And I don't mean to, we're a diaspora, so there are many aspects to us. And I don't want to speak for the whole Black community, nor could I. And there was something about the fact that at one point, there were Asians and Caucasian people that I saw on street corners with Black Lives Matter signs. And me and my Black friends have both all agreed, we've never seen anything like that, ever. So number one, that's really encouraging. Number two, I hope this doesn't become another thing where our attention to something brighter and shinier distracts us from this, because right. I told you about this, Jamie. It's like somebody coming up to me that's white, and they're saying, did you see this show on Netflix? Oh my gosh, it was gripping. It was so real. And I never saw this episode before, and it was fantastic. And it's like me turning to them and saying, there are 100 episodes of that series, right? So that's what I think is happening right now. And I think it's incumbent upon everyone to be open to educating themselves about something that is not pretty, systematic racism and segregation, the history of it. And if we're not careful, it will continue to perpetuate itself. So I'm really, really hopeful that now that this has gotten, you had people protesting in New Zealand, in Paris, in London. And that I felt such relief when I'm seeing that, but I'm also have some concern that this will be something that we lose momentum on collectively. And so I'm very, very interested to see what happens next, and to be a part of what happens next.
Yeah, I heard your desire for action, and not just acknowledging the latest episode, right? And maybe a desire to make a difference in real change. Yeah.
And it's interesting because I have this book over my shoulder. I put it there. It's Marshall Rosenberg's Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life book, which I love. And sometimes I feel like the phrase nonviolent communication almost implies, okay, well, this is devoid of anger. This is devoid of rage. This is devoid of any kind of unsavory emotion. And I see that differently. I see, the phrase was, your protest is the language of the unheard. And so what we're seeing right now is a lot of people that are angry, that are confused, that are frustrated. And unless we have a healthy place to first acknowledge that, not make it wrong, and create some spaciousness where that can be expressed in a healthy way, that's a part of the action that I feel is necessary, in addition to protesting, in addition to making donations to a particular organization, in addition to all those things.
That creating a space to be heard, and to have people actually express their emotions fully. Is that?
Yeah. For anger to be honored.
Mm-hmm.
And I spoke to you about a very touching video. It was touching for me from an activist named Kimberly Jones. And what Kimberly Jones articulates in this 6-minute some odd second video is about the systemic disconnect. And she likens the separation that people are experiencing from an economic standpoint. And she uses the metaphor of monopoly. And she basically, in so many words, says, if Black people haven't had the same access to play the monopoly game for 400 years, and then for 50 years after that, the board is cleared and it's here to benefit some, not others, there's not a lot of real trust. And so for people who have this idea of, well, people shouldn't be looting, they shouldn't be rioting, they shouldn't be doing, burning up these stores, this, that, and the other. She has a very valid point, which is like, if you're in an experience where you're playing a game that's not on the up and up, and you feel like you're getting the sleight of hand continuously, there's not a lot of trust to build on. So what the things that, the building blocks that I feel is necessary at a time like this is, what does it look like to build trust? What does it look like to have police where their ethnicity reflects the community that they're protecting and serving? What does it look like to have dialogues where it's okay to hear somebody who is angry and pissed off and not all of a sudden feel guilt? You know what I mean? And if you do feel guilt, that there's a place to take that. So those are my concerns. Those are my hopes.
That's the world I want to live in too. And I'm so glad we're talking about it, because that is one of my passions too. And, after Ryan and I talked about it in here, after I saw the cold-blooded murder of George Floyd, I was in shock, man. I had never seen that. I'd never seen that. And I realized I needed a place to mourn, to express my anger. I also had my own emotions come up, and not about me, but yes, that creating safe spaces for people to be heard, even anger. And what you said resonates for me. The nonviolent part, it's not about being a doormat. It's about expressing your full truth in ways that honor the experience of others and yourself.
Yeah.
So that's what I stand for.
Yeah, there's an authenticity piece of that, right? Where you're expressing yourself authentically, but you're also doing it in a way that's non-judgmental to the person that you're talking to, right? This is my experience. I'm taking ownership of my feelings, my anger, and just wanting that space to express it.
Yeah.
It's important.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think there is a place for judgment if you're owning it, I have a story that, bam, and just, so I think there is a place in NVC for people expressing their strong opinions. But you're right, Brian. The eventual goal of NVC is to create connection and create dialogue and find that place of mutual understanding.
Yeah. I love the judgment piece, provided that I'm able or willing to translate it at some point. So I have this little metaphor, which is like juicing my judgments. And imagine I have like this industrial sized juicer, and on the top I put in the judgments, the bulk of the fruit, and out of it comes this pulp. And the pulp is, the actual ingredients of what is inside the judgment. So if I'm enraged and I say to you, it doesn't feel like people are taking me seriously. It doesn't feel like people are taking this movement seriously. I have doubts of where this is going. The yumminess in that is that I'm scared. The yumminess is that I'm feeling hopeless, but I'd like to feel some hope. I'd like to feel some progress. So that's what I talk about in terms of translating my judgments, from being able to hear what could be landing as a tragic message and trying to find the gift in the midst of that. And that's what I aspire to do with myself and with my clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of my inner practice as well. I try to recognize those judgments and then translate it into the heart of my experience. And I love the metaphor that you use, the fruit, kind of grinding it up. getting down to the essence of what's real.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I'd love to go back to something you said earlier, Cory, about, your kids in Times Square and sort of that experience of having to explain this to them at such a young age. I'm remembering when I was 10 years old, I was running around with my Star Wars toys, not having a care in the world, and it's like, I can't imagine having that conversation with my parents. And I'd love to hear more about sort of like what is alive for you in that moment of wanting to, obviously there's safety around your children and authenticity, and like I'd like to hear more about that from you.
Yeah. So there were two moments on that trip. One is we were in Times Square, and that's when I realized I wanted to have the discussion with the boys. And then their mom and I went down to Brooklyn, and we were sitting in a park area where we saw a protest weave its way through, probably about 200 people in the protest. And I said to myself, okay, this is the seminal moment here. So we kind of broke it down, and we said, from point A to B to C. So you see, guys, these people are marching by us right now because something is really important to them. And you guys have been hearing things here and there in the news and from your friends, and something really, really terrible happened where someone was murdered. And so we just went through this story. We went through the reality of how the Black Lives Matter up in Times Square connected to the protests that they were literally seeing with their own eyes, walking past them, and the fact that they are African American and how this stands to impact them. So it was a little bit of like sharing these ideas and then hearing back from them. And so it was a really beautiful dialogue. And my guess is, they're still processing. I know I am after that conversation. But for me, it's about, even if it feels clunky or funky, coming from that place of what you mentioned, which was authenticity, this idea of authenticity. And I think it landed for them. I think they understood that what's going on the planet right now is important and that it impacts them. So that's my hope.
Right.
Yeah, it must have been a really touching moment for you to, vulnerable to engage your kids in that way, And
yeah, it was like
show up for them authentically.
It was like the universe said, okay, here's your moment. You can't deny these people walking around, because there's a part of me as a parent that wants to continue to protect them, and I imagine that I grew up somewhat sheltered, and there's a part of that I don't want my kids to grow up too fast. I don't want them to have to deal with things that are challenging. And I realize I could do I could put my head in the sand, or I could be willing to what I call practice scary honesty and talk about things that are even hard for me to talk about. And it's an ongoing conversation with their mom and myself and them. So, but we're moving forward.
Yeah, I noticed feeling touched myself as a dad. It's like my son's back there, and thinking back to when he was young, and I wanted to protect him and keep him golden as long as possible. That beautiful innocence. Just noticed some sadness coming up, because I long for that world of safety where everyone has a place to be themselves, and where everyone's needs matter, right? Mm. And like Jim Mansky said the other day, meet the needs of the people, and peace and justice will follow.
And that's a situation now, at least for me, where we are truly all in this together. And I'm really hopeful on what could possibly happen here. I think the fact that 3 months ago, Black Lives Matter was more of it wasn't as mainstream as it is now as a statement and as a movement. And I would just invite people to have dialogues, discussions with people that don't look like them from a standpoint of learning. I was reading in the news yesterday about a gentleman. He lives in what would be considered a high-end neighborhood in Nashville, Tennessee, Black man, and he was frightened of going out and walking in his neighborhood because of what may happen, the violence that he may experience. And so he happened to just mention that on an app, a neighborhood app called Nextdoor, and people started to reply that were in his neighborhood, and they said, "I'll walk with you." And 2 people turned into 10 people, turned into 30 people.
Mm.
And it became a movement because this person was willing to share their honest experience of being scared as a Black man walking in their own neighborhood.
Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah, the vulnerability there, right? To say, hey, I need help, I'm scared. And for people to step up, I think that's just a wonderful response.
Yeah.
It highlights the power of vulnerability, you know, to actually get your truth out there, and people that resonate with it have the opportunity to show up and meet it. I wonder if this is a good point to pause our conversation and maybe start back up later.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Let's take a pause and then do another one.
Right.
All right. Thanks, guys.